Hey everybody, it's Jason Dutch with Dig on America. As you can see, I'm driving, actually going through what they call the grapevine here in California, my way from LA up to Bakersfield, and so forgive forgive any of the background noise and sketchy picture with the sun glaring in and stuff. But I just wanted to take a minute to post a quick video and sort of address some of the criticisms that I have heard lately from our friends in what I would describe as the establishment Democrats, the corporate Democrats, and their conversations toward more progressive-minded candidate or more progressive-minded Democrats, which I sort of consider myself to be one. Now, I would probably identify as more of like a libertarian progressive, because I believe in the Constitution. That's not to say progressives don't. I think they absolutely do. But, you know, with things like free speech and, you know, having taxes as low as possible, with still the ability to fund, you know, the appropriate social safety nets and everything that we need, just basically not wasting taxes, right? So, so I have some libertarian leanings, you know, gun ownership and stuff like that, and I have some progressive leanings with things like universal health care and, to a degree, even UBI, I think, isn't a terrible idea. Raising the minimum wage with, you know, I think 15 is too low, at least for most companies, especially your giant corporations like Amazon and IBM and stuff like that. Possibly a different conversation for your local plumber, but that's for a different day. So that's kind of where I identify myself in this intersectionality of political leanings, right? So, but what I've noticed is that when I go into conversations with people who are of the Hillary Clinton fans, right? The Nancy Pelosi fans, the Joe Biden fans, you know, those types of Democrats, your Dick Durbins and stuff like that. There seems to be a hostility towards people who, like myself, would have preferred Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden. Now, I'm not going to sit here and talk and get into the conversation about whether or not Bernie would have beat Trump in 2016 or whether or not Bernie would have beat Trump in 2020. Obviously, we were, as people who voted against Trump, we batted 500 in that battle, right? We lost the first time with Hillary, and we won the second time with Joe. So, but the conversation seems to be that progressives don't pass legislation. Progressives are loud and obnoxious. That Bernie Sanders has a checkered past. That he doesn't actually have a message for minority communities, specifically for the black community. You know, that AOC and Cori Bush and, you know, the rest of the so-called squad do not pass legislation, but yet other progressives like Lauren Underwood do. There is truth to really all of that. But I think that you also have a lot of those arguments carry over to the Hillarys of the world as well. And I'm not trying to pick on Hillary Clinton specifically here. I'm not anti-Hillary. I never liked her. I did not vote for her in 2016. I voted for Gary Johnson because I did not like Hillary Clinton. I like her a little bit more now than I did in 2016, but you also have to remember that in 2015, I was still a registered Republican. So, just as far as that goes. And I think that Hillary Clinton was, and I used this in a space the other day on Twitter, I said she was a repulsive candidate, and I was attacked for that. They called me a misogynist, etc., etc. When I made that statement, I said, and I even corrected them, I said Hillary Clinton was a repulsive candidate. She was a repulsive candidate. She repulsed voters. In other words, she turned them away from her. She did not have a message, nor did she have a plan for the United States of America. She had a fun slogan, Stronger Together, and I agree with that slogan. I think we are stronger together. But if you recall, a lot of people were turned off by Hillary Clinton for good, bad, or indifferent in 2008 and in 2016. She made a lot of mistakes. She had a lot of screw-ups. She waffled her position over and over and over again on a multitude of different issues. She went on the Breakfast Club and said she carries hot sauce with her. And then they said, it sounds like you're pandering to the black community. And she says, is it working? Obviously she was kind of joking there, but I think that wasn't 100% a joke, right? Like she will tell you whatever the hell that you need to hear in order to vote for her. Now, is she alone in that camp? No, not by a million miles, right? But what I don't see is, wow, big accident there. I've never seen that's a Penske truck just ripped in half, like literally the trailer part just shredded. That's amazing. Anyway, back to Hillary. I think that everything that you could say about Bernie Sanders' past, you can say it about Hillary Clinton's past. But the biggest difference is that Hillary Clinton kowtowed to the corporations, just like Joe Manchin does, just like Kristen Sinema does, just like Joe Biden does, just like most of the Democrats within Congress, within the Senate, and those who have run for president. Obama is not exempt from this either. They played the game in the establishment way, and that way has not worked for pushing across effective, long-lasting, beneficial policy for the American people. If you oppose a nationalized health insurance system, call it single payer, call it UHC, call it Medicare for All, which I think is a terrible name, by the way. Whatever you want to call it, if you oppose that because you think it's too expensive, you do not get my vote. Unless you're going up against Trump or some other Trump acolyte like Marjorie Taylor Greene or something like that, right? Now, it's funny that, and I'm talking about in the primaries, obviously, for the most part, you don't get my vote. In the general, that's a different story. Now, everybody was all worried about whether or not the Bernie supporters were going to vote for Joe Biden in this last election. Everybody was all worried about whether or not Bernie was going to endorse Hillary Clinton in 2016 and whether or not he would endorse Joe Biden in 2020. He did both of those things. Hillary Clinton never came out and said she would support Bernie Sanders when asked that question specifically. She didn't do it. Nancy Pelosi was also eerily silent on it. Okay? So Joe Manchin, eerily silent on it. And when you are beholden to your corporate donors, when you are taking in tens of millions of dollars from private equity firms, from fossil fuel companies, from insurance companies, from healthcare that wants to keep our current healthcare system as is in place, when you completely reject any conversation having to do with with paying black, restitution. I'm not for the words. I'm losing the word because I'm in traffic. When you don't even want to have that conversation, right? And when you go into a conversation with a piece of legislation, a good example here is the infrastructure bill we just passed. Another good example was Build Back Better. Another good example was the affordable, the ACA, Obamacare. We stripped the shit out of all that stuff, and none of the Republicans voted for it. Yet, because we wanted it to be bipartisan, we stripped the entire bill down. And yes, I understand that you have to, especially in the Senate, if you have to have 2/3 in order to have a non-bipartisan bill go through, or you have to have 60 votes, not 2/3. But I understand the argument that getting through something is better than getting through nothing. But you have to have people who are willing to say, I am going to stay here till the end, and I am going to fight for keeping the principles and the policies intact inside of this legislation as long as possible. And if we happen to strip it out of the bill, we bring another bill to the floor immediately to try to get that legislation passed, especially when it comes to healthcare, and especially when it comes to paying people a living wage for their hard-earned labor. I find it also ironic that when I go into a Twitter space or a YouTube conversation or whatever the case may be with establishment fans, we'll call them Hillary fans, that they are all worried that I am going to, as a more progressive-minded person, as a radical leftist, that I am going to yell and scream and not know my facts and all of these stereotypes that they lay upon us, while at the exact same time yelling and screaming, and in a lot of cases bringing up alternative facts, use a Kellyanne Conway quote, or telling half a story, or being hypocritical in the way that they hold Bernie Sanders or AOC to a certain set of standards, but not Hillary Clinton or random member of Congress A. And it's kind of silly. They're yelling at me, telling me not to yell, and that is really freaking frustrating. It's infuriating, to be really fucking honest with you. Now, do progressives often, do we have a bad habit of yelling sometimes? Yeah, but we yell because people don't listen. And when people don't listen, that causes yelling. I don't understand what it is that they think that continuing to trust the powers that be within the DNC, within the DCCC, within your state Democratic parties, and within the so-called left-leaning media, specifically MSNBC and CNN, who almost never will say anything negative about their establishment candidates, and will always be super shady in the way that they cover candidates like Bernie. They've been a little bit more forgiving to the squad, I think, because they know they're popular and they don't want to lose viewership. But look at the way that the networks and the DNC collaborated together on the debates during 2016. Hillary Clinton got a lot of free press from them. Donald Trump got even more free press from them. And honestly, I think Donald Trump got more free press from MSNBC than every other candidate of the 20 or 17 or whatever it was Republican candidates and the two major Democratic candidates combined on MSNBC. You think that didn't influence voters? And you had a very similar breakdown of the coverage between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Bernie was always looked at as, he's got this grassroots movement, and now off to a 30-minute expose on Hillary Clinton, and having the campaign, these debates at during weekends and up against other programming. This has all been researched and scrubbed and looked at, so that you don't get the platform that you might get from the media just between 9 to 5 on a regular workday, because they're covering Trump and Hillary Clinton or covering Joe Biden and wondering when Joe Biden's going to come back. And a lot of people will say, well, yeah, but look at all the coverage that Bernie got. The media declared Joe Biden dead. I disagree with that completely, because what they talked about all the time was how Joe Biden was dying and not doing well, and trying to figure out why that was, and talking about when he was going to make a comeback, and looking forward to South Carolina so that they could say, hey, you know what, Clyburn's going to endorse him, so he's going to do good and he'll turn things around there. And don't worry, because Klobuchar and Buttigieg are going to drop out of the race, and they're going to give all of their support to Joe Biden. So Joe Biden still has a chance to come back and make a comeback. Now, I'm not anti-Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden has done a fine job. I think that he has things that he could have done better on, specifically Afghanistan. I reject this notion from Republicans that he's ruining America, and like we can see America falling apart because the port's taking too long to get us stuff, because there's not unification in the Democratic Party, and because of gas prices. Joe Biden doesn't really affect any of that stuff. I work in transportation. I can tell you right now that Joe Biden has next to nothing to do with the amount of cargo containers that are stuck in Long Beach. The Longshoremen's Union has something to do with that, as I just disappeared here. The freight coming from China, COVID. There's a semiconductor shortage, obviously, so a lot of freight is delayed for that. And are there things that Biden could do to mitigate that? Yes. Should he? Yes. Do I think he should do more? Yes. Do I think it's his fault? No. Okay? It's not his fault any more than it was Trump's fault that COVID-19 started. But it's certainly Trump's fault as to how he handled COVID-19. And it's, when you're in office and something happens, you get to own it. Biden gets to own Afghanistan. He gets to own Ukraine, which is happening right now. And I think he's done a fine job on it. But you'll never see anyone in the middle saying the same thing about the squad or saying the same thing about Bernie Sanders, because they're so worried about their beloved conservative-minded, at least fiscally conservative-minded Democrats, and guys who support Black Lives Matter on the surface, but then criticize it, anytime that they burn a dumpster. We're super united on hating Trump, and we're super united on the fact that January 6th was a terrorist attack, and we're super united on a couple of other things. But these conversations are short-term conversations, guys. They're not going to be in the conversation for a long time. What's going to be in the conversation for a long time is the things that the folks in the progressive side are pushing. Climate change. That's not to say Democrats are anti-climate change. They just don't do shit. Affordable housing. They'll pass it, but then more corporate Democrats on the local level say, well, we think it's a great idea, but we don't want the affordable housing in this neighborhood because it might damage our property values. It doesn't reflect the culture of the neighborhood. And then what do? They gentrify communities of color instead. The minimum wage. Where's the legislation? You pulled it out. You pulled out a $15 minimum wage when we have not had a raise to the federal minimum wage in years and years and years. And it's pathetic. And our healthcare system, we spend more by a mile than any other country out there. And a lot of that money goes to insurance company profit. Strip that out, we'll be in a lot better of a position. So I find these arguments unfair. I get what you're saying in a lot of stuff. I'm not defending the fact that Bernie's perfect. I know he's not. He's got a lot of shit that he hasn't done right. It's a lot of stuff his fault with his failure to connect with the black community. Et cetera, et cetera. But, hey, if you don't want to work with a guy because you're afraid he's a democratic socialist, he can't pass legislation. So anyway, I'm at 20 minutes here. I'm going to cut this down. If you would like to support Dig on America, please do so. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/Dig on America. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Dig on America. We're going to start doing more content there as well. We'd love to have you guys participate with the show when we do our live streams on Wednesday nights. We have a lot of great candidates that join, most of whom are progressive-minded, but not all. And we're just trying to do what's right for America, what's right for race reconciliation, stopping bigotries and the systemic biases that, are really what puts us in this position, examining history. Because I'm going to tell you what, the conversations we have today, they all have their roots in history. And if you don't examine it, you can't figure it out. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Talk to you.